Hello and welcome back to the RevOps show. Last episode and this episode have some common themes, as system design and the three zones of execution kind of correlate with one another. Doug and Jess will be going through each zone, what they mean, how they even came to be, and what this all means for you and your company. I know you probably have a lot of questions, but trust me, they will answer them all. There's not much more I can say on that, so let's get started.
Jess, they kicked us out of our studio.
They did.
It's
being renovated.
I think there was like a leak or something, and so some of the ceiling tiles and took out camera 2, I think is what they said. So I wanted to go in and take a look at it, but they said I didn't have a hard hat, and it was OSHA compliance, and
you probably break more than fix it.
That's what I.
That's what you excel at.
It's my superpower. I'm here to break things.
Yes.
Jess, it's 77 degrees and sunny here in Serona Park, Maryland.
Is it? Is it?
And the Nats are in the bottom of the 9th inning.
Oh wait, are we trying to record this during a baseball game? It's got to be the theme, baseball. Good to bring up baseball somewhere.
Everything is. We're just here for baseball. Everything is kind of filler for baseball, right?
Pretty much. So we're going to try to record this and hold your attention during a baseball game.
Hopefully there's not much longer for the baseball game.
Oh, are they losing?
So no. They're not losing.
Oh, okay.
And it's the bottom of the 9th.
Okay. All right.
So what are we talking about today, Jess?
I want to talk about the 3 zones of execution, Doug.
3 zones of execution.
Yeah.
Let's talk about it.
So I think first it would be helpful if you would introduce what are the 3 zones of execution and kind of lead us in that way.
So in fairness, this is not fully an original idea. So this comes from a McKinsey model. I'm pretty sure it was McKinsey, called the 3 horizons. And we kind of hijacked that a little bit. And Jeffrey Moore, author of the greatest book in marketing ever written, Crossing the Chasm, wrote a book called Zone to Win, where he talked about the 4 zones, which kind of broke the 3 horizons into 4 zones of, because every great marketing consultant has to be able to break everything down to a 2x2 matrix. And so that's what the 4 zones did. We kind of, have taken it out of the theory of, it's an excellent theory for large business. It's really a model about innovation. And we kind of have, began to put our twist on it to, for the mid, more towards the mid-market company. So I, from my perspective, at least, it's a little bit more operational. It's a little bit less theoretical, though there's still an awful lot of theory. And, anybody that's familiar with Moore's 4 zones or McKinsey's 3 horizons is certainly going to, I don't mean to claim any of what I'm going to say here as being, necessarily original. I will say that it's all driven from real firsthand in the field implementation. Did that sufficiently, or did that not, or was that just disclaimer? Or did I answer your question?
That was just disclaimer. Now, can you tell us about what are the 3 zones and kind of?
Okay, I'm sorry. I thought so. Like you're like literally asking what are
I'm
the 3 zones?
I'm literally asking for those who are not familiar with it. I think the disclaimer was good, but.
Okay, so now I'll get into the why of the 3 zones to explain what the 3 zones, to share what the 3 zones are.
Okay.
The human conscious mind, as opposed to the bot conscious mind. The human conscious mind is actually, we don't deal well with nuance, right? Our brains are pretty programmed to try to take nuance and put it into black and white. And one of the places where this applies is the perception of time. And there's really only 3 times that we physically understand. yesterday, like before, now, and later. So it's either the past, the present, or the future. And like it's, now, from an execution standpoint, everything from, unless you actively manage against it, the only thing, everything breaks into this is something that has to be done now, or this is something that has to be done later.
It's fascinating because it's how my 5-year-old communicates when things happened. Everything that was past was yesterday. Everything that's current was today. And I don't remember how she communicates future, but it is funny that you say that. She's got no sense of anything outside of yesterday, today, and tomorrow. So it's kind of interesting.
Dogs are the same way.
Yeah.
Dogs don't have a sense, but by the way, like that's the reptilian brain.
Yeah.
Right. And what we have to realize and what we have to accept is we've created lots of verbiage to sound as though we have moved beyond our reptilian brain. But from an action perspective, our reptilian brain is the dominant force. So we're not as different as we would like to think, from that element. So, especially when you're talking, in any resource constrained organization, but especially when you talk about small mid-market companies where they are inherently resource constrained, we don't have strategy teams. Heck, we're happy if one person, if their job can actually be, fully future focused.
Right.
Right. GE has teams of people that do nothing but assess and work on things that other things are doing. Right. And so it's a very different element. And so when it comes to implementing change, and we use 3 zones less, I mean, it absolutely would apply if we were talking about innovation, but we use it less from the standpoint of innovation theory to really, managing execution and managing the change required.
Right.
Also, I've talked about this in other things, and I've actually talked about it for, heck, it's probably been it's been a decade. Wow. Long time. So it's kind of old to me. So I don't talk about it as much as I used to, just because but good is no longer good enough. And so it used to be, I mean, look, if you wanted to be great, you had to do great things. That game hasn't changed that much.
Right.
But you had, I mean, I'm going to, mid-market America was filled with, mature companies that did good work, made good profit, produced good, and all under the term of reasonably good returns, occupying very much of kind of the middle ground.
Yep.
I mean, if you go back to the days when I grew up, my parents owned a travel agency. They were one of the early travel agencies. You worked with a travel agency. I mean, the number one determinant of what travel agency you would work with when my parents started an agency was geographic location. Were you within a mile and a half of the travel agency? Now, actually, one of my friends, we become friends. But one of the people I work with at HubSpot, she lived in Boston. She then moved to San Diego, and she's now actually moved back to Boston. And in this last instance of moving back to Boston, it's almost like funny, but it's a non-event. So it never started, but it had no impact on her job. I mean, can you imagine a day that she had to take a few days off to manage the move, right? So you moved from San Diego to Boston, nothing about your job changed, right? And so that whole world has adjusted, and as software has eaten up America. Jess, guess what? The game is over. The Nats win. Yes.
Woohoo!
So now I can focus.
Yes.
So it's this whole aspect of good is no longer good enough, and transformation used to be something that would happen occasionally. And the truth is, most businesses went through their entire life without ever actually needing a transformation. Today, I think it's safe to say if you're not transforming, you're dying. Right. And so how do you do that? How do you transform all the time? Well, I mean, some people transform all the time by just changing everything all the time.
Right.
And it exhausts everybody, it kills, etc. And change management is hard. And the difficulty is, and we see this all the time, especially, I'm going to say, especially in sales and marketing. I don't know if it's especially in sales and marketing. I don't live in the other disciplines. someone identifies a problem, someone identifies a fix, and everything is talked through the lens of now. You and I used to have conversations, and every now and then we still do. You would say you're underwater.
Yep.
And you remember what I would say in response to that?
How's that any different from any other day?
No, that's not what I'd say. I'd say it's impossible to be underwater.
Oh, yeah.
Right. And you see, that's the memory I'm working with, everybody. We've had this conversation multiple times.
I blocked it out.
Right. And what do you mean? I said, okay, well, what are you saying, that you have more things on your plate? Mm-hmm. You have more things on your list than you have time to do them. And you said, yes. I said, okay, so, let's just make up a number. How many things do you have on your list? 15. How many things can you do? 7. Okay. Which 8 can't you do?
Yep.
Right now we're now at 7. Guess what? You're not underwater anymore. Right. So how do you make that a discipline? Well, this is where the 3 zones come in, right? When you talk about the 3 zones, when you establish the 3 zones, and you look, you can follow the zones we're talking about here. You can put your own twist on it. That doesn't matter, to us certainly, but what it does is it creates a framework, and it creates, it creates a 3-dimensional element to what's needed. And so the 3 zones the 3 zones are built on time horizon. So zone 1 is the next 90 days. Zone 2 is from 90 days to a year. And zone 3 is 3 years and beyond. Now, if we were, just so everybody knows, if we were to look at the 3 horizons approach, which is the McKinsey basis, horizon 1 was less than 12 months. Mm-hmm. Horizon 2 was 1 to 3 years. Horizon 3 was 3 to 5 years. Right. So what we've done is we've changed that time frame to make it more about execution. Right. And it's now, so we turned horizon 1 into 2 zones. And then for purposes of execution, we kind of put everything else in the, in what was horizon 2 for us, zone 3. So under 90 days to 1 year, 1 year beyond, 1 to 3 years is kind of how we think about it. Zone 1 is the performance zone. Zone 2 is the transformation zone. I'm sorry, I'm going to the traditional. Zone 2 is the enablement zone. Zone 3 is the transformation zone. So again, just so everyone understands, and we actually have a webinar, or we have a brief video that talks about the 3 horizons and the 4 zones. What Jeffrey Moore did was he came in and he actually broke horizon 1 into 2 zones. Yep. That he called the performance zone and the enablement zone. Then then the second horizon was the transformation zone. And for, if you're talking about innovation and you're talking about large company, the vision and incubation zone, that doesn't apply. And that certainly doesn't apply from a RevOps perspective. So hence, right. So it is the performance zone, the enablement zone, the transformation zone. And we've referenced the 3 zones a couple times previously. And as RevOps inherently is a zone 2 discipline. It is an enablement zone discipline. So zone 1, next 90 days, performance zone, that is all about hitting numbers, meeting objectives. To use a term that I actually like less, I used to love it, but I like it less and less, is get shit done. Zone 1 is about get shit done. The performance zone is you got to get shit done. Yep. You got to hit numbers, you got to meet objectives, you got to pay bills, you got to close sales, you got to finish things, etc. And if you think about it, everybody has a zone 1. There's an organizational zone 1 and there's an individual zone 1. So what I would say is RevOps primarily is a zone 2 discipline, but the individuals in RevOps, they have a performance zone. They have a first zone, which is what are the things that they need to get done so that they can be transferred into the into the performance zone. So the transformation zone, that's all about being the company that you need to become. Right. And one of the things that I see as a big issue for companies is most people fall into 1 of 2 categories. They're either too short-term focused or they're too vision long-term focused, and they're filled with great ideas, but it never manifests itself. Yep. Here, it enables and activates both of those perspectives, right? So you need to have that vision, and you now give a time frame where you have time. Then the middle area, that's 90 days to 1 year, that is the enablement zone. So the performance zone is all about meeting objectives, hitting the number.
Yep.
The enablement zone is about staging, operationalizing, systemizing, optimizing, right? Staging being a key thing. If you talk to most people in a frontline role as a company scales, the number one issue that they'll complain about is things are always changing. They never feel like they're at a point of stability. And I'm going to tell you, people cannot perform at their best when they don't feel stable.
Yep.
It's like, I mean, I deal with this Meniere's disease and I get vertigo attacks, and you can't do much when your head's swimming, even though consciously it's not happening. It's really hard to get anything done. Well, that's kind of what it feels like in a lot of places. That used to be what it felt like all the time here. I think we have that issue far, far less.
Agreed.
Right.
Agreed.
Although I would say that if anything, our rate of change has increased, not decreased. Right. But we now have this enablement zone, and we now think about, okay, how are we staging it so it becomes part of? And so what happens is you go through the transformation, you lift your head up, you look back 18 months and you're like, holy shit, things have changed, but you never felt like you were going through massive change. And so what this does is it gives you a framework, and it also gives you a prioritization schema. It begins to establish timing with priority. It establishes urgency. Urgency is all about the performance zone with importance, enabling importance not to get squeezed out. It works amazingly for how to structure your organization. You begin to build teams with those focuses. But and we're a small business, we work with businesses, really just about every business. Actually, every business we work with certainly has more employees than we have. And if they're not doing more revenue, they've raised more revenue than we're doing. But so I live I work in the performance zone, I work in the enablement zone, and I work in the transformation zone. But now, instead of it just kind of being one big mixed pot of, I don't know what, crap stew, it's now, okay, I'm wearing my enablement hat now. I'm wearing my enablement zone hat now. I'm wearing my performance zone hat now. Okay, this is an enablement zone item. It's not a performance zone item. So it creates different types of prioritization schemas. And by the way, I can tell you, having been through some good situations with it and bad situations with it, when we're in a really good position, performance zone issues actually get deprioritized.
Yep.
Hey, you know what? We're going to focus on the enablement zone because we kind of have performance dialed in. So I can actually push away urgency and really focus on importance. I've had other times where it's like, okay, no, we got some numbers to hit, or how good the enablement zone is doesn't matter because we ain't getting to the transformation zone.
Right.
Right. And it becomes, so it allows that type of shifting without it just seeming like craziness. It brings an order to the chaos of riding the tornado of growth.
This brings up, so actually this was a question I had, because we talk about there being a chasm between strategy and execution, which I think is what you're talking about performance to transformation zone. And we talk about that the cause could be either you've got a flawed or missing enablement zone. How do you kind of identify that? How do you get your team into kind of that enablement zone? What does that look like in action? I guess is really what I'm asking.
I don't understand the question.
How do you build that bridge between performance and transformation? Like you talked about, that's where we stage, that's where we operationalize, that's where we systemize. What does that actually look like? What are the things you do to kind of enable your team to do that, to encourage your team to do that?
Well, I guess the first question is, how clear is your destination?
Mm-hmm.
Right. So where are you trying to be qualitatively and quantitatively in a year, in 3 years and beyond? One problem when I look at 1 year plans and 3 year plans is that oftentimes we treat the 1 year or the 3 year like it's the finish line, when in fact it's, I could be trite and say it's just the next starting line, but it's not even that. It's neither a finish line nor a starting line. It's just, I mean, candidly, if you're on a fiscal calendar year, December 31st means something really special to you, but it's no different than December 30th. It's no different than, April 13th.
It's like a waypoint, right? We've talked about
Correct. So
waypoint.
So it's like, okay, here, depending upon what your long-term element is, where you're trying to go long-term, I think that's where your talent strategy lies. Hey, we need different types of people. Hey, I mean, we decided at a point before people were talking about it to focus on this thing we were calling revenue operations.
Yep.
And so part of the transformation zone was we need to figure out what that is. We went through a good 2 years of, I think the word pivot is overused. Someone would have said we pivoted 18 times. I would say you can't pivot 18. If you pivot 18 times in a lifetime, it's not pivoting, it's shuffling. Like we did a lot of shuffling, and I would actually say we didn't even shuffle. We stumbled.
Yeah.
We did lots and lots of stumbling. That was the learning element. I mean, heck, I can remember when we went back and we said, hey, we're going to build playbooks. And we had this idea of what a playbook should be.
Yeah.
But we had never built one as an organization. I had built versions of playbooks in the past, but that past playbook was not going to be enough. And it was like, okay, well, we're going to build playbooks, and playbooks is going to be a core part of what we're going to be. But we screwed up a couple playbooks.
Yeah.
Right. We said we're going to map business process. We screwed up a couple business process maps. Well, it's the transformation zone. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, cool. We're supposed to. That's a very, very, very heavy learning element. And we actually weren't even at the point where we could define it clearly enough to begin to stage an enablement zone. Then we started getting a little bit more of a working theory. And that got to our later half of our enablement zone, right? It began to be, okay, hey, let's, and now we're putting together, what's the structure of each deep dive? What's the path of each deep dive? How can we enable somebody who's been here for less than 30 days to run a deep dive like one of our senior people can run a deep dive? We're now beginning to talk about those things in our enablement zone, so when, as our transformation zone elements, as the vision has gotten clearer, which the funny thing is, when the vision gets more clear, at least for me, it actually feels less like vision.
Yes. Oh, 100%. Yeah.
Right. And so,
because vision is this intangible thing. Once it's tangible, it's no longer visionary.
So it's like, it's, I mean, how did we create an enablement zone? I mean, here's what I'm going to tell you, actually. You don't have to do anything. This is not, we could quibble, debate over the time frames.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And I would say that there are some companies, there are probably some places where the performance zone is probably more like 30 days.
Yeah.
Right?
Agreed.
I don't think that's healthy. This is a side note. I'm seeing more and more and more people. There's so much money, so much stuff going around. I'm seeing more and more people, in the MarTech SaaS space, just turn over like crazy. I mean, 7 months here, year and 2 months here, and I mean, they're on the 6th gig, and I know them well enough to know that they're at least reasonably good at what they do. So I mean, they don't completely suck, and I get it. There's more money being offered here. This person just raised there. There's that. It's crazy, but there's also an element that, if you've only been somewhere for a year, you don't know shit.
Hot take.
Right,
I totally agree with you. It's funny because you think you do.
You're a hell, right. You are smack dab in Dunning-Kruger.
Yeah.
Right. And the thing is, you said, well, no, I've been around for 10 years. Okay. Yeah. You've been around for 10 years, but you're just repeating the 1 year element. And by the way, the last 10 years have been so homogenous that it's been it's been Groundhog Day of 6 to 12 months of experience, right? You haven't gotten to that next inflection point. You haven't gotten to the place where what got you there isn't enough to get you to the next place. You haven't gotten to where you're confusing brains with a bull market. Two of my favorite quotes are, Warren Buffett, you only learn when people are in the ocean, you only learn who's naked when the tide goes out.
I haven't heard that one before.
And Tom Friedman, I think it was in the Luxus and the Olive Tree where I read this. He said, if you jump off of an 80-story building for the first 79 stories, you can convince yourself you're flying.
Yeah.
And so, you know, I mean, when I was 20 years old, I knew a hell of a lot more than I do today.
Yeah.
I thought I did. Right. The more I know, the dumber I am. And so you have a performance zone, you have an enablement zone, you have a transformation zone. The question is, and the mistake that I see is that the enablement zone and the performance zone are one and the same, and that inflicts way too much change. The number one issue, the number one reason that change doesn't stick is the massive power of inertia and the whirlwind. You have a day job, right? You have a job that has to be done. You have certain elements that if those don't get done, you will get fired one way or the other.
Yeah.
And so it is, you know, it has been true since the beginning of time, the tyranny of the urgent. The urgent always crowds out the important. So simply thinking along the lines of, is this a performance zone issue, an enablement zone issue, a transformation zone issue, will have a dramatic effect. By the way, if you're a one-person shop, I'd ask that question. And you know what? Early on, people talk about side hustles and how their side hustle became this huge element. And one of the reasons why I believe that that's true is when it's your side hustle, you don't have your performance zone is very mild.
Yeah.
Right? I'm making my living over here, so I don't have to make money over here. I can do a lot of enablement zone.
Yeah.
You know, like, I mean, I've seen people who have, you know, started doing LinkedIn, Twitter, whatever, where they're posting every day, multiple times per day. It's their side hustle. That is absolutely, I mean, heck, some of that's transformation zone probably, but that's absolutely enablement zone. And then over a period of time, all of a sudden people start asking you, and then they come out and they go, see, that's what you have to do. That's what you have to do. Now, here's the thing. When I started my business, I had to feed my family. Right. And I'm very comfortable with the amount of enablement zone work that I did. But one of the things was I had major pressure on the performance zone. Right.
Right.
And so, you know, you might find, you know, I want to spend X amount of time in each particular zone. And at the end of each 90 days or whatever period you decide to stop and assess, hey, you know what? I wanted to spend 30% in the enablement zone, and I'm lucky if I spent 5%. Okay, cool.
Right.
No problem. Yeah. Right. Okay. What are we going to try to do? And I'll tell you what, if you prioritize the right 5% in the enablement zone, what I would say is, what's the 5% of the enablement zone that you could focus on that would reduce the pull in the performance zone? Right. So now all of a sudden you could spend 8%. So I don't think you have to, like, I think when you when the question comes, well, how do I start an enablement zone?
Yeah.
I think that's where the idea of overthinking comes in. The enablement zone is there. It's really a question of, are you using it?
Okay. So you could be utilizing all three zones simultaneously, just depending on what it is that you're working on and what that initiative is or what that thing is you're trying to accomplish.
No, I don't think you can be utilizing them simultaneously. I mean, I guess you are using them simultaneously because someone's working on the enablement zone while someone, I mean,
okay.
RevOps is work, but when you talk about how do I go from everything's now and later to I begin to carve out an enablement zone, well, the first thing you do is you acknowledge it.
Right.
The second thing that you do is you know, as your initiatives line up, don't look at your initiative. And by the way, this is an interesting thing. We look at our initiatives and we say, do we have the capacity to do this?
Yep.
Well, you should add, well, which zone are these initiatives in?
Yeah.
Right. And so if you think about it, you've got certain things, your quick wins. They don't take a lot of effort or time, and they can have good impact. That's zone one stuff. Some things take a lot of effort, but once they're there, they have good impact. Some things don't take a whole lot of effort or a whole lot of time, but it takes a while for them to build. So like, you know, posting on LinkedIn every day.
Yeah.
It doesn't take a lot of effort. Now, I think people underestimate how much effort it takes, but I'm saying that that is not your full-time job. That, but it will take a while for it to have impact. That's your zone 2 stuff. Some things are going to take a lot of effort, and it's going to take a lot of time for it to have impact. That's your zone 3. Now you start looking at your zones, and I can almost guarantee that if you were to do a zone assessment, your zone 1 would be overcrowded, and your earlier impact zone 2 would be the next overcrowded. You could have zone 3 overcrowded if you got someone, the crazy visionary. Although the crazy visionary is typically taking the visionary stuff and trying to shove it into zone 1.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah. Not that I would ever do that. Right. So you're going to look at your, your longer time frame zone 2 and zone 3, they're underallocated. Strength comes from so if you think of a 2x2 matrix, I got zone 1 here. So the southwest, that's zone 1. So not a lot of time, not a super amount of effort, not a lot of time to have impact, not a super amount of effort.
Yep.
Zone 2, northwest, is not a lot of time to have impact, will take some effort.
Yep.
That is, you don't build strength there.
Yeah.
As a matter of fact, I would say those are the zones that expend energy. So let's call northwest, and this gets a little bit to where I think this doesn't align. This is why we didn't just take Jeffrey Moore's 4 zones. So sorry. So let's call the northwest zone 2. Let's call that zone 2A for purposes of this discussion.
Okay.
Zone 1 and zone 2A, those expend energy.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Zone 2B, that's your southeast, your longer term impact, longer term to have impact, not a super amount of effort.
Yep.
And your zone 3, that's where strength gets built. So that's where capability is built. That's where value is created. That's where capabilities are formed. So the right side creates, the left side expends. And if you borrow money long enough, you can spend more than you make, but eventually that's going to cause a problem. Right. You can have an overdrawn account. Well, why is everyone so tired today? And if you think about it, and we've gone through our periods where we're freakishly exhausted, but we've also gone through other periods where we're like, okay, there's something wrong here because we are doing so much more than we've ever done before.
Right.
But I don't feel exhausted.
Right.
I actually have time to do things. Right. Well, that's where our zone 2B and zone 3 have been working really well. And I would say zone 2B feeding into zone 2A, that's where that has been strong. And by the way, when we're doing this, we're rapid prototyping what we're doing. So there's a lot of learning that's happening. So, hey, we're going to test this out. And you know what? We're ready to backstop it. So we're doing our next iteration of creating the process that the idea, how could somebody with 30 days? And we are fully ready, even though it was priced towards, the area that we want to be able to offer a lower price approach. We're ready to step in with those resources to come in and treat it like it has to be fully custom, like we do with our higher end, because what we know that, the gain here is the learning that's going to take place that's going to ultimately enable us to stage. We would not be able to do that this way if we didn't have this mindset. We're dealing with a client going through their very first pilot, large organization going from nothing to something.
Yep.
And holy cow, how are they learning what they don't know? There's the old phrase, I don't know what I don't know.
Yep.
No one really gives full credence to, okay, well, what's it really feel like when you begin to find out?
Yep.
Well, if we hadn't talked about the enablement zone, they would be freaking out. And that's not to say that they're not freaking out a little bit, but they would be majorly freaking out because it would be, oh my God, oh my God, oh my God. Right? It's like, oh, no. Remember, we're operationalizing, we're staging here. This is supposed to happen. We're not in the performance zone right now. As a matter of fact, the whole way that the pilot group got put together was, look, this is an enablement zone activity. This is to position us in about 60 days to make the core elements a part of everybody's performance zone. So how do you do it? Where do we want to be? Where are we? What are our initiatives? Let's allocate them to the right zone. Let's prioritize them, and let's learn.
And then the last thing I wanted to ask is, what are some of the challenges you run into in each zone? Like, what are some of the roadblocks? What are some of the issues that come up? You kind of talked a little bit about, if you got a visionary, they try to push some of that transformation zone stuff into the performance zone. We have a tendency to want to lean more into spending more time on the performance zone, because that's the I guess lighter lift stuff, if you will. So what are some of the challenges within each zone?
I mean, the first challenge is this is a framework. This is a model. It's not reality.
Right.
Shit happens. It's not like everything draws out that it's clean. This is zone 1, this is zone 2A, this is zone 2B. It's what zone does this belong in? I don't know. What zone do you think it should be in?
But we have such a nice graphic to highlight it.
I think that, especially early, old habits die hard. Inertia is really powerful, and inertia is everything's performance zone.
Yep.
The tyranny of the urgent still exists, and the performance zone is where oxygen is gained. It's kind of like, weightlifting is a zone 2 activity. If my arm is dangling, by a single tendon and blood is gushing out, someone coming to talk to me and saying, you look a little overweight. Have you thought about doing something? And you seem out of breath. Have you thought about doing some cardiovascular? Right. It's kind of like, that doesn't fit. So I think it's easy to measure the performance zone, and it's easy to feel the transformation zone. And so I think we overfall to measurement. Actually, I listened to the greatest podcast today.
RevOps show?
The second greatest podcast today. It's Michael Lewis's Against the Rules. This year, he's doing his thing on experts. And the focus of the episode that I listened to today was on Bill James. Bill James is the founder of the whole analytics. As a matter of fact, everything that is practiced in data science, everything that we call analytics, I don't care what the discipline is. If Bill James isn't the father, grandfather, he is the, distant cousin. The whole thinking of to popularize, to bring it in, which led to Moneyball. And the thing that was interesting is Bill James, he actually stopped writing his book, The Baseball Abstract. He basically insulted this community of people that became his followers, because when he first looked, like when he was a huge baseball nerd, wasn't a player, was just an absolute baseball nerd. And he actually called, he would point to the baseball field and he would say, that's a field of ignorance. And that's kind of where, and he created the whole abstract that led to Moneyball, that led to, and of course, everything is Moneyball now.
Yep.
And, so he is not a fan of the metric WAR. WAR is wins above replacement.
Oh, okay, yeah.
And one of his points was in his, in the first several years, I think at one point he finally put a rating in because the book became popular and you needed to, but he was against a rating because it doesn't matter what the rating is. A rating is an opinion. It's not a fact, it's an opinion. And if it's a number or a formula, then it's just an opinion expressed numerically. It's still just an opinion. And his point was, when numbers are used to make you think, to improve, I said, when numbers are used to improve your thinking, when data is used to improve your thinking, it can make you better. But too often, data gets used to replace thinking. So WAR answered the question, who's the best player? Who's the highest value player, right? And James's point was, the analytics don't tell you that. The analytics just tell you the questions to ask. And Michael Lewis asked him, well, as you look today and you call this a field of ignorance, is it less of a field of ignorance? Have you guys figured just about everything out? Is it the same? He's like, no, it's actually more a field of ignorance. The more I've learned, I don't learn. The more I've learned that we don't know. This gets to that. We use metrics to replace real life, right? This is it's not the finish line. It's not the starting line. It's just a line. It's not even a line.
Right.
It's just a day we decided to measure. that desire for certainty. Like my aim with the zones of execution is to free up the ability to accept and play with uncertainty. And so what happens in the enablement zone, you've got, and I think the enablement zone is the most dangerous zone. It's harder to measure. It very easily gets looked at as a cost rather than an investment. And what is most interesting is when the enablement zone is working at its best, it is perceived to be its most useless. So imagine that. If the better you were, the less value it looked like you were worth, what would life be like? Because see, when the enablement zone is working, the performance zone isn't insane, and yet and you're hitting your numbers and things are working, and you know the enablement zone is all about solving upstream problems upstream. And if I solve upstream problems upstream, right? If I invest in education, then I reduce poverty, and now poverty is lower. And we go, well, why are we spending so damn much money on education? So we start cutting education. And then the problem is it's a decade or longer before poverty starts coming back. And now you need a quick fix. And so you jump the quick fix to quick, and you're getting weaker and you're getting weaker and you're getting weaker. So that enablement zone, to not get pulled in, far too often it gets pulled into being just a performance zone support group, if you will. Or it becomes, we talked last week, it becomes, or a couple of weeks ago, the sales prevention group.
Yeah.
So really keeping that on tack, that's probably the hardest part.
So I think my couple of takeaways are changing your state of mind about thinking about what zone do things belong in, although acknowledging that everything's not going to fit quite in that box, but thinking that way can be profound and kind of in how you work on things and how you look at things. And then I also really liked what you said about when the enablement zone is working, the performance zone is easy. Like it makes sense.
That leads to the other challenges. Again, we tend to think of the ideal and execution as being far too clean. So I don't think the performance zone ever feels easy.
Okay.
So
fair.
Right.
Easier.
Well, you almost look at it and you say, well, what the heck do we need enablement zone? We just need to hire more performance zone people, right? That's kind of what I'm getting at.
Right.
And especially as it relates to, business, but on the sales and marketing side, we live in a dynamic system. It is constantly changing. And like the term operating system is getting used more and more frequently to describe non-computer oriented things, which I think is great. But who would invest in software that isn't being actively maintained today?
Right.
Do you know what we call it when software is no longer being maintained? We call it end of life, right? We will no longer be supporting. Now, sometimes it makes it, especially with cloud-based, it physically stops working. Sometimes it still works, but nothing's going to change. Well, that's
right.
Probably time, right? Well, that's how most people manage their organizations. Their organizations are operating systems, right? Their organizations are software. It is software, right? It's not algorithmic software, but it's software, and software needs to be maintained. And that's what the enablement zone is.
On that note, I think that's a good place to stop. Thanks, Doug. This was fun. That's one.
That's one. I'm on my new rig.
I'm excited for you.
I can tell.
And that's a wrap on this episode of the RevOps Show. The piece that stuck with me throughout the entire episode was the saying from Doug, modified a little by myself: the 3 zones of execution brings an order to the chaos of riding the tornado of growth. And to me, that was just a very powerful statement in terms of what the 3 zones of execution can really do. If you enjoyed this episode, please make sure to go subscribe on Spotify and Apple Podcasts, leave us a review, and share the episode. If you have any questions you would like to ask Doug or Jess about the 3 zones of execution or anything else RevOps related, email me at hannah@imaginellc.com or hit us up on Twitter @demandcreator. Until next time, remember, can't solve your upstream problems downstream.